Welcome to On Our Watch, a podcast about coastal erosion and sustainability in Louisiana, as well as the implications for coastal systems worldwide. My name is Marian Evans. I'm a filmmaker and a producer of the documentary On Our Watch, a feature-length film about Louisiana's coastal land loss crisis. The film's director, Jonathan Evans, and I are proud to produce this podcast series that will continue to explore important coastal issues through conversations with local residents, community leaders, and experts. In this episode, we're speaking with Chett Chiasson. Chett is the executive director of the Greater Lafourche Port Commission, a political subdivision of the state of Louisiana that encompasses Port Fourchon and the South Lafourche Airport. And now, our interview with Chett Chiasson. Thank you so much, Chett, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you are the executive director of the Greater Lafourche Port Commission, yes, which encompasses both Port Fourchon and the South Lafourche Airport. And I wanted to ask you about how you first became interested in this type of work and this community specifically.
So I'll start with the community. I was born and raised in La Rose, which is just up the road from here. I now live in Cutoff. So born here, grew up here, went to high school just down the road from here. So this is, my roots. It's my blood. It's what I enjoy, where I enjoy being and raising my own family. I left from here in 1994, went to LSU, did an undergrad in political science, I have a master's degree in public administration. While in undergrad, I worked for the Port Commission on what we affectionately call the mosquito crew. We still hire kids, college students in the summers to work cutting grass, picking up trash, typical roustabout type work, working with our maintenance department. And I did that, but I could see and recognize the importance of the port and its economic impact and all those things. My mom was a teacher. She's a retired teacher now. She's here. My father was worked on the boats, worked in the oil and gas industry, but loved shrimping. And he was a fisherman at heart. And I grew up in the marsh and all of those things. And just kind of, when I got my master's degree, my wife and I, we had just gotten married. We just had a baby, and it was like, hey, we probably need to go where most of the help is, right? So we moved back here. I worked for a couple of boat companies, and first I did IT. That's a long story. We're not going to go there,
Okay.
Right? But after I did IT for a little while, I became a logistics manager for a boat company. And then I went from logistics manager for 8 months or so. Then I became the personnel manager at a very young age, but always had my eye on the Port Commission. I always stayed in touch with the port director and knew that, if something came around, so I started applying for everything that came up, right?
Okay.
Even though I didn't qualify for it, I applied just to get my name out there and for them to continue seeing Chett Chiasson, right? And then ultimately, right after Hurricane Katrina, so September 12th of 2005, I picked up the job at Port Fourchon, the Greater Lafourche Port Commission, and I began doing business development and grant writing, and my first task was handling FEMA and the 30 projects that we had in repair projects for FEMA. I was successful, and fortunately, learned everything I possibly could. And then in February 2009, I was named the next executive director, and I took that role in January of 2010.
Wow. What a story. What a time to start on at the port.
Absolutely. And if you remember what happened 4 months after, April 20th of 2010, everything that I thought I was going to be doing as a port director completely changed after April 20th and what happened with the Macondo incident, that unfortunate tragedy that took place.
Yeah. And so, can you explain for our listeners a little bit about what Port Fourchon is and what services it provides for this community and the entire country?
Sure. So Port Fourchon, in its simplest form, is an intermodal hub of activity where all the products, goods, and services necessary to explore for and produce energy in the offshore space comes in via truck or inland barge and changes modes of transportation to an offshore supply vessel or a helicopter to get offshore. Now, in and of itself, Port Fourchon is not providing those services, right? We're a political subdivision of the state of Louisiana. We're completely autonomous, however, right? We operate ourselves, we generate our own revenue. We have an elected Port Commission, 9-member Board of Commissioners who are elected to 6-year non-staggered terms. Those are my bosses, that's who I answer to. And we are the only elected Port Commission in the state of Louisiana. And that makes us unique, but we are a very unique location, right? We're a very unique area, but it makes us unique because we're the only one. But it's really good for us because we answer to the community, right? We have to do everything necessary to sustain our economy for the community, and that's what our job is. And so as the Port Authority, our jurisdiction is the 10th Ward of Lafourche Parish. So it's basically the Intracoastal Canal in Larose, south of the Gulf of Mexico, and all points west and east in southern Lafourche Parish. And what we do is we build basic infrastructure. We build roads, we put in water lines, we dredge channels, we build land out of open water. We mitigate for that development as well, and sometimes we have more material. So we do above and beyond mitigation. So we create or have an ability to facilitate growth. So we then lease out that land that we've created, that waterfront that we've built, those in those slip areas. We lease out to our customers who are the service companies for the offshore energy industry. And then they build out their facility the way they want to service their customer, who are the offshore energy companies.
So I know the Port Commission puts a strong emphasis on environmental and coastal protection in addition to the business and economic work that you do. So why is this an important issue for the port, and how do you see the environment and industry as working together in South Louisiana?
So we have a slide on our presentation that we give very often. Lots of people come in to see Port Fourchon, and it says industry and environment, not mutually exclusive. And we really believe that. And we also have a slide that says holistic resiliency. And that's what our philosophy is. We understand that industry and the environment can and do work very well together. And Port Fourchon is a really good microcosm of that, of how those things can work very well together. I can tell you right now that the land that has been developed in Port Fourchon and everything that surrounds it would have washed away if we wouldn't have the industry interested in Port Fourchon as a service base. So it all has to work together. That whole mindset of holistic resiliency is continuing to maintain our heritage and our culture, making sure that we have a community, we have an economy, but at the same time, keeping that environment intact and enhancing it as we continue to move forward. This place that most people don't ever see or hear about is critically important to every person in this country. And, with our service base servicing about 16% of the nation's oil supply, right, on a daily basis. With everything that's going on here, we're fortunate to have more resilient infrastructure coming in place now, right? We have an elevated LA Highway 1, Louisiana Highway 1, going to Port Fourchon. We have half of that already constructed that we're utilizing. Another half is under construction now. With all that being said, it's about 18 miles of elevated roadway, and that's about $800 million of infrastructure. Why do you build $800 million of infrastructure to a place that not too many people really know about in the grand scheme of things? Everybody in the industry knows about it. Everybody in the renewable space with offshore wind is starting to know about it. But But in the grand scheme of things, people are like, where in the world is Fourchon? Is that in this country? Right? So, why do you build an $800 million road to that piece of land? Because when you can't access it by road, but you could otherwise be operating in Port Fourchon, it has a $46 million impact to the energy industry, and it has a $500 million daily impact to the national GDP, right? So we are a critically important piece of land that has continued to have focus for both industrial development as well as coastal restoration and protection, right? So working with the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, working through federal programs like QIPRA, working with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and all of those groups, there has been over $500 million of investment in restoration and protection projects over the years, and more to come. Right.
Sounds like it's pretty baked into the core of what you guys do.
It is, and at the same time, we talk about holistic resiliency, right? I mentioned that. It's not just about doing those things or talking about it, right? It's about actually performing that work. So as part of our deepening plan for Port Fourchon, we want to use, and we always use, every speck of sand beneficially. Anytime we dredge in port, we're either building industrial developable properties, or we're building marsh or ridges, which we've done. We've built a maritime forest ridge as well, former ridge that had eroded away. We're using every speck of sand beneficially. So as we embark on a deepening plan, that's going to generate upwards of 20 million cubic yards of material over the next, 10 years or so. And we worked with, created a group called the Partnership for Our Working Coast, right? Because Louisiana is the working coast. Partnership for Our Working Coast that includes Port Fourchon, the Water Institute of the Gulf, Chevron, Shell, Danos, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, that puts the science behind the best ways to utilize that material and provide the most benefit for our community, infrastructure, industry, and to investigate carbon capture and sequestration.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you about one of the port's coastal restoration projects, which you just mentioned, the Maritime Forest Ridge and Marsh Restoration Project. So can you tell me what that project's all about and how it came to be?
Absolutely. So as part of our development, our northern expansion development, we were created I'm going to go a roundabout way here, but we were created in 1960 as a port authority. Not much happened for the first 18 years. And then from 1978 or so, mid-70s, through the 90s, it was a expansion, but a slow expansion in the port. But we embarked on the E-slip development in the mid-80s, because even though we had a big downturn in the oil and gas industry in the 80s, more often than not, there was more consolidation, and they consolidated to Port Fourchon because we were centrally located in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay. So then fast forward to 1995, Congress passed the Deepwater Royalty Relief Act, which incentivized deepwater exploration and production in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. So after 95, in 1998, before the third leg of our E-slip development was even dredged, it was fully leased out. So then we had to move forward and go with a major expansion plan. So that's when the northern expansion came about. Started in 2000, started with slip A and slip B, built that out through the early 2000s, and then we're finalized slip C already, and now we're into slip D, right? So as part of that northern expansion, we purchased 3,000 acres to the north of the port, and that's what we deem our mitigation area. And everything that's not has been a mitigation area yet, or we haven't filled it in with marshland, is a sanctuary. So nobody can go fish in it. It's just kind of a sanctuary there at this point. But we now have an area for our initial development of slip A and slip B. We have over 20 years of marsh that has been created and has been sustainable there, right? So we have about over 1,200 acres of marsh that we've created in the port as part of mitigation and above and beyond mitigation, which leads us to the Maritime Forest Ridge. So when I first started here, the Maritime in 2005, the first 3,000 feet of the Maritime Forest Ridge had been built. Then we have built another 3,000, so we have 6,000 linear feet of this ridge. So it's recreating a ridge that had existed there. And the way the ridge came about is when we first permitted slip A and B, they were the vessels were a bit smaller, and the slips were actually deemed to be needed 500 feet wide. Well, between the time it was permitted to the time it started construction, the vessel operator said, "You better build bigger because our vessels are about to get 100 feet longer than what they are today," right? So they went from 500-foot slips to 700-foot slips. So that extra material was extra because when you're going for a permit for development, whatever footprint you're impacting is the footprint. So if your slip is 500 feet or 700 feet wide, you're still impacting that area. So your mitigation is still the same. So we had more material and we needed to do something with it. So we came up with a beneficial project and built the Maritime Forest Ridge. So basically, the Maritime Forest Ridge was built, it's settled some now, but it was built to a +8 elevation in the center, and it tapered down about 200 feet wide, and it tapered down to marsh elevation, right? So we work very closely with a number of agencies, local, state, federal, on the Maritime Forest Ridge, but mainly the Barataria Terrebonne National Estuary Program. So now we have over 15 years or more of data on the type of plants and trees and shrubs that can grow in that salinity of material, as well as the type of birds that utilize it for feeding and nesting.
Very cool. I think it's interesting that wasn't something you were ordered to do. It's something you guys just decided to do.
That's right. And that's something that, like you said, a lot of people go, "Wait, you weren't mandated to do that?" No, we want to use every speck of sand, like I said, beneficially. We because we have an eroding coast, right? We live on a delta. It's settling. Our subsidence rate is high, and we need to continue to evolve and do things that can sustain ourselves for the foreseeable future.
What would you say are some of the biggest lessons you've learned over the course of your career working at the port?
Be prepared for anything. Right? We always know about hurricane preparedness and being fluid, right? Because every storm is different. We had the worst one that we've ever experienced in Hurricane Ida in 2021. National Weather Service will tell you it's a Cat 4 storm. I'll tell you it was a Cat 5 storm all day in Port Fourchon and here. I stayed in this building. And it was not fun. Yeah. and I can see why, the thoughts that took place in Mississippi and in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Ida is our Katrina, right? And so just be prepared for anything. 4 months after I became the port director, we had the BP disaster or the Macondo incident, and that was a tragedy of life. It was a tragedy for the environment, and we're working through that. But at the same time, understanding that we have to continue to provide energy needs for our country and around the world. So, it's a lot of different things that I've learned over the years just by dealing with all the different things that come my way.
Right.
Every day's different. It's an exciting thing to do. It's an exciting position to have. And the fact that I grew up here and have my roots here, it makes it more rewarding.
Right. So expect the unexpected.
Expect the unexpected. It's probably the easiest way to put it. You put it better than I can.
And looking towards the future, what projects or goals would you most like to see happen with the port, either environmentally or economically?
So they're the answer is yes to environmental and economically, right? They all work together, right? And I mentioned some of that earlier, but we're in the process. We went through a long process of doing a feasibility report for deepening of the port to just enhance our capability to service industry, offshore energy industry, whatever that may be, right? So we're bullish on offshore oil and gas. We're also bullish on offshore wind and whatever else may come our way with green hydrogen and those things. So, we have been, for over 10 years now, we've been working on the deepening. We're about to start dredging from 27 feet of draft to 33 feet of draft. And all of that material is going to be used beneficially to create about 800 acres of marsh to the west side of the port. Again, for further port protection and to protect the rest of the community further up north. And then we have applied for a permit for what we call our Fourchon Island development. That includes a bridge to get to Fourchon Island because the old one was so old it had to be removed. So we're going to build a bridge for access there, as well as do a deep water facility on Fourchon Island that will need 50 feet of draft. So we're in the process of working with Congress on this. They're currently working on the Water Resource Development Act, or the WRDA bill of 24 right now, and we should have some verbiage in there that'll allow us to move forward on a 50-foot report to submit back to Congress and, the Assistant Secretary of the Army's office and the Corps of Engineers that ultimately get approved by Congress, so that we can go to 50 feet of draft just in Bell Pass out to the 50-foot contour, which would allow us to do deep water rig repair and refurbishment, project cargo offloading, offshore wind, some fabrication for of jackets for the offshore wind market and the offshore oil and gas market, as well as decommissioning and whatever other opportunities come our way. There's some potential for liquefied natural gas facility as well, small scale in the port. But there's a lot of ideas and a lot of plans, and we're moving things forward in order to enhance both the economic value of Port Fourchon and our capability to be a full service port for all things offshore energy, as well as for the environmental value that all of that material brings to us, to continue protecting and enhancing our coastline as that first line of defense for the rest of the community.
Wow. Well, that all sounds very exciting.
Okay. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Chett. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and look forward to further podcasts in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to On Our Watch. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Chett Chiasson. Don't forget to subscribe to On Our Watch on your favorite podcast app to be notified about future episodes. You can find our feature-length documentary On Our Watch, as well as a video version of today's episode, in the links below. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. This podcast is made possible through support from the Greater New Orleans Foundation and executive produced by Bruno UK Steiner.